Okay, welcome back. So in this episode, there's quite a lot to cover. So the first thing we're actually going to do is we're going to work on an enemy controller so that we can get enemies going across the screen. We're going to have enemies spawn on the left side so that there's always going to be enemies going to the right. We're going to then create a countdown for something like along the lines of a hunger meter or hunger bar. This will force the player to have to constantly get plants. Gives it a bit more danger and a bit more of a reason to keep playing. We're also going to add a little bit of some icons to the canvas, just to add a little bit of detail for things like hunger and possibly future things you got to collect. And then we're going to have a hunting mechanic for one of the enemies, so a specific enemy. And I'm probably just going to use a random fish sprite. So let's get started. I think it's fair to mention that this game is going to be more based on Frogger, but you'd be able to go to left and right and up instead of being able to just go up to progress. You'd have to get food and stuff before a beach would become available. Now, as you can see here, I'm just making the enemy controller. Now, it's not going to be something complicated, or I'm trying to keep things very, very simple, mainly because I want to try and get as much done as I create this as I can, and do as many different things as I can. This can mean to very sometimes sloppy or maybe not great code, but I think it's okay, at least for now. So as you can see there, I was just creating a very basic controller with enemy controller, which would just simply go right at a certain speed. It was nothing too crazy. I'm just showing it now that it's definitely going right, and it's resetting the scene every time I hit them. I also want to create like an enemy spawn, as I mentioned before, so that there would be enemies spawning on the right all the time, possibly at different intervals. So as you can see, I'm setting up different intervals. I need to get obviously get the actual enemy, the objects for this array. And then it's just very, very simple code. If you spawn it, if it's not equal to 0, keep spawning them. If it is, stop spawning one, and it's really straightforward code. Then what I do is I need to actually create the objects to spawn off, put the script on them, set all this up. I think I at this point I'll also create some different variations of enemy, and then add them to create a prefab of them, so I don't have to I can just bring them straight into the scene or use them in the array whenever I need. And it's very simple. But I do later on, I think if I remember correctly, I do later on unpackage them so that I can edit them. I basically change the enemies completely later on to add a bit more sophistication to them. As you can see, what I've done is I've just added a bunch more plants in, and just to see in a bigger view how it looks. So yeah, you see the enemies, they've got different speeds, so I've set them up for different speeds, and they have spawned in, and it's very slow intervals, but they are spawning in. So I've sped it up a bit. I've added their spawn, changed their spawning, and at the moment you can only see crab. It's just really bit unlucky. And you can see there's a beach at the top which you can get to, which once you get a certain amount, it basically leads to you winning. So you can see now that it's getting closer and closer to Frogger, just a more turtle version. So now we're going to move on to creating a countdown for hunger. I'm just setting up some text just so it's easier to see. And it's it's going to be very, very simple code. It doesn't need to be complicated right now. I just need to play to die when it reaches 0, and whenever I pick up a plant, it should reset the timer. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm setting everything, all the text and stuff, and I'm setting all the scoring. You may have noticed that I've used public floats and things. Usually you don't really want to interact with variables and things inside the actual inspector, especially if you know they're not going to change that much. So usually you'd either set it to private or you just wouldn't have it as public at all. It would be serialized or something like that. So there you go. We've got the hunger, it works. It's very straightforward. Now we're going to set up a collision box for our hunting. And the way this is going to work is that if a player enters a collision box set quite far out from the enemy will start chasing them. And every time we go out of the collision box, he'll stop. To do this, I basically set up I need to get the target's position first, obviously. So I need to get the player's position, and then I set up a few functions leading into the update, which is to get the enemy's area, to detect it when they've entered it. And I've also added a function of rest, so that when it's in rest, it's not doing anything. I can always add something to the rest later, give it a specific animation. But as you can see, what I'm doing is every time you go into a collision, it'll set the attack zone to true or false. When it does that, it'll activate move to player if it's true. So if I've entered the area and it's become true, I'll start move. It'll do the function move to player, which is very, very simple. It's just move towards the position of the player, of the target, at a certain speed. It's very simple, and then have that equal to the new transform. So yeah, it should work very simpler, and that it does. So as you can see, it works very well. It's chasing the player. There is a problem with doing it this way rather than doing it something like distance, which I do start looking at a little bit later. So you may have noticed I do record these in advance, and then sort of do a little bit of a commentary. But later on, I do look at using things like distance to player instead of using collision boxes and detecting them. It's just much more easier, and there are problems with doing it this way. But as you can see, it was working. The fish is chasing them. So now what I'm looking at the icons. These are just some basic icons I created. Again, I created all the sprites needed. And I'm just having a look at some of them may not be even used, and I don't think I've used there's quite a lot of sprites that I haven't used, but it's just in case they're there, and I can always use them for a different project, for basic temporary art. So I'm setting them up very simply. So originally I was just going to use the hunger icon, but you never know. When you need to go to the beach, I was also going to have that beach icon appear. But as you can see, everything is working. I can get food and the timer. I'll probably change that into, like I said, a hunger bar, and maybe put that to the left of the screen. I've got a few icons there. I can collect plants, and now these enemies going to the left and to the right of the screen. So everything's working. In the next episode, we're going to probably look at scenery. We're probably going to look at trying to make some kind of environment for the player to go to, make it look a little bit more like the ocean. I'll see you next time.